Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Love Meets Literature. This is Installment 2 in our little countdown to Halloween, all about vampire books today. I'm your host, Rachel, and you can find me on Instagram at Paperbacks and Sketchbooks.
And I am your other host, Joe, and you can find us at Love Meets Literature.
Please do give us a follow, it will help us immensely. So, I'm very excited for today's episode. Vampire books are not something that I'm super familiar with. I've read a few, but I'm on the hunt for some new ones. So, I feel like this is going to be a great recap of what there is in terms of vampires in fictional novels.
I would agree. I don't think I've really read any books that were dedicated to vampires. I have one on the shelf that I'm going to talk about later, but I think that's about it.
Yeah, and I was never a Twilight girl, so I haven't read those. And I feel like I'm not on the vampire bandwagon just yet, but maybe I could be.
I do remember watching one of the movies back in the day, but I think that was about it. I never read the books either.
Well, before we jump into our vampire books, how has your past reading week been?
Well, unsurprisingly, I'm still working through The Witcher. However, I did read a ton of it. I made a ton of progress. So I'm hoping that I can have it wrapped up maybe by the end of this week, but we'll see. There's still quite a bit of book to go through.
How would you rank it so far compared to the other books in the series that you've read?
I think this one is definitely better than the last book, which I think I gave a 3.5 stars. So this one I would say is probably 4 solidly right now. The dialogue and the characters kind of jumped in right away, as where I feel like previously he kept doing that thing where, you'd have to build up to it and, hey, remind you of all the stuff that happened previously. This time it was much faster. It was like 10 pages of that rather than 50 or 60 pages.
I am having major FOMO with The Witcher because all you do is talk about it. And I feel like I need to read it so I understand what you're talking about.
I mean, it is really good. Like especially the first 3 books that are technically like the prequels. I actually think those are some of the best, if not my favorite books out of the series so far, but we'll see how this ends. Technically, there is one other book that I don't have. There's an 8th book that I'll have to find somewhere.
Oh, one that wasn't in the box set?
Right, because that box set was the original 5.
Oh.
And then, yeah, I think there's 8 because there's 2 prequel books, then there's 5 original in the actual series, and then there was a 6th one published afterwards, like way after. I think it was in like 2013, like 10 years after the last one or something like that.
He's not still writing Witcher books, is he?
I don't believe so, but I mean, who knows?
I mean, yeah, some authors take a wildly long break from a series and then go back and it's like, surprise, I have more. I kind of don't like when they do that because it's like I thought it was done.
Yeah, I could definitely see that. You're kind of like, I've wrapped up this character mentally and they're like, done, closed out, and then all of a sudden there's a new story about them. Can be kind of jarring.
If I really love the series and I really love the characters, then I'm always game for like more books on them. But also if I am under the impression that a series is wrapped up or there's been a really long break in between books, then sometimes I'm sort of let down by what comes next, or I'm just like not as excited for it as I would have been.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. It's kind of like I don't know if it's like a psychological thing, but it's same way with movies. Like if you take a really long time to release the next movie, a lot of the hype has probably died down. Though there are exceptions, right? Like The Incredibles 2. That one was definitely an exception to the rule. But I get what you're saying.
Yeah, so hopefully he doesn't spring any Witcher surprises on you.
Yeah, because then I'm going to have to get another book and then another book.
Just keep buying books.
I guess so.
Well, my past reading week, thanks for asking, has been pretty okay. I'm working my way through some things. I started an arc of Christmas in Chestnut Ridge by Nancy Nagel, and it's already published. Like I failed arc reading that one, and now I just have to normal read it and review it and whatever. But, I started it and I was like, this could kind of give like Hallmark movie vibes. It's kind of what it's getting at, but like right now it's just like moving kind of slow for my liking. I've never read a Nancy Nagel book, but the story sounded cute, so I was like, I'm going to try it. But I don't know if I'm vibing with it because right now I'm at the very beginning and I've had this book on pause for like a week now. I should get back into it. I should try to get back into it. But right now in the book, they're just talking about the main character's realtor job and like it's kind of just explaining step by step how to sell a house. And I'm like, can we get to the Christmas, please? Like,
Yeah, that's a bit odd. But you're also reading a Christmas book in like Halloween time.
well, yeah, but I read another Christmas themed book and then I read a Christmas themed short story too because they're publishing this month and next month. It's normal for Christmas books to publish in October and November. So obviously, if you're arc reading one of them, you have an advanced copy. You get it before then and you're expected to read it by the publishing date. So sometimes I have to take a pause on my thrillers and read a Christmas book.
I guess, I mean, that makes sense logistically.
Yeah, but Christmas in Chestnut Ridge, like I think it is going to have potential once I get past all the like explainy stuff. It's just like it's kind of dragging. I have no desire really to pick it up. But I did read a short story by Mary Kay Andrews called Holiday Hideaway, and it's cute. It was like 100% Hallmark movie. This could be the plot of a Hallmark movie, and it could be well done if it was. So maybe Hallmark will pick it up and make a movie. They should, because I would watch it. Anyway, it's not out yet. It publishes later in the month. But it was basically about this girl who was squatting in this old house. The owner had died. And then one of his relatives comes to clean up the house while she's squatting there. And so she goes and camps out in the attic so he doesn't know that she's there. And it was actually really funny and really entertaining. And I just enjoyed it a whole lot. It was a unique storyline and a quick read. Very Christmassy, very wholesome, nice little story. I think it's an Amazon original, or it's going to be, so it's possible it might be available for Prime members, but don't quote me on that because it's not out yet, so I don't know. But it was very cute. Holiday Hideaway by Mary Kay Andrews, a short story, comes out at the end of the month. I would highly recommend for any Christmas lovers who want a short read that gives off classic Hallmark movie vibes. Like it just screamed Christmas.
Well, I guess that's probably what they were going for, so I guess they nailed it.
Well, yes, they were definitely going for Christmas with naming the book Holiday Hideaway.
Naturally.
With a bright red book cover. But it was good. I enjoyed it. And then I'm like currently reading another book as well that I'll get into a little later. But I don't know. I'm feeling kind of on the verge of a slump, and I'm just trying not to get into another reading slump because I finally got out of one last month. And I've been breezing through a bunch of books, and now it's kind of like slowed down again. And I'm just like, my brain wants to read, but I'm too distracted by everything else that's happening, even though there's really nothing happening. It's just, there's a lot going on.
Yeah, I mean, I'm the same way.
Yeah. So I'm trying to power through. So hopefully this upcoming week is better for reading.
Yeah, that's what I have to do too. Just keep reading, pick up the book, stare at it, read a page, just keep going, keep powering through.
I know. I'll get there. Sometimes when I keep powering through, it just makes me not want to read. So I just have to, I guess, do something else. Maybe I need to find like some short cutesy story on Kindle Unlimited or something and just read that. And I just need fast things. Otherwise, if it's slow and dragging, it's not going to hold my attention for very long.
That's fair. Maybe you should do your audiobooks.
We've discussed this. I'm not great at audiobooks. I literally have to be doing the audio while doing absolutely nothing else because my brain picks up whatever my eyes are looking at. So if I'm trying to paint or crochet or do something, my brain is focusing on the task that I'm doing. It's not focusing on what I'm listening to.
Oh, so then, right, you don't retain any of it.
No, and then
That's right.
I get to a part where like, something interesting is happening and I'm like, how did we get here?
Wait, who's that guy?
Yeah, who are these people? So eyeball reading is just what I need to do.
Stick with what you're good at, I guess.
Yes. But I do hear that we have some Wikipedia fun facts today on vampires.
This was so much more interesting than I thought it was going to be.
Really?
Yes. At least my perspective. I don't know about other people, but because when I first opened the article, the Wikipedia article that is, about vampires, I was like, okay, I get it. They're vampires. But then like I read mainly the literature, like how the books came about and how people started writing about them. That was super interesting. So to start us off, let me define what a vampire is, according to Wikipedia, which is a mythical creature that feeds on vital essence of the living. And in most instances, this is blood. But way back in the day, it also was either like blood or flesh of the living. And then also back then, they were like, and I'm talking back then, like 1700s. Weirdly enough, they were in all cultures. Like every single culture across the globe had some form of folklore around a vampire. It was interesting because they were seen as like ugly and deformed and bloated, and they were like dark as night and things like that, or they had like blood red skin, which is very opposite of what we see now, which is like pale, pasty kind of skin tones and things like that. And they're like tall and elegant and slender. So very opposite from how they saw them back in the day. The legends and sort of the actual fictional storytelling around vampires came around the 18th century in Europe. And before this, they were seen as like real beings. Like people genuinely believed that vampires existed. And so they did all these crazy things to like prevent them from spawning, right? Like they would do these weird burial rituals, and they would do these super odd, like after they buried you, they would cover you in certain things, or they would even like make modifications, if you will, to like the person's body. So that way, if they did come back, they wouldn't be able to like run properly or walk or do weird things, all that kind of stuff. It was very odd. And it also led to mass hysteria, which was then turned into vampire hunting. So similar to how witches were hunted.
I have so many questions. Like,
Sure.
why did people think that vampires were real?
From what I read, it had something to do with like body decomposition. So like people back in the day didn't understand that your body like decomposed.
Interesting.
And so if you were normal and you like, were decomposing at a normal rate, they were like, okay, that's a normal person. But if you were like in better conditions where you didn't decompose properly and you like still retained most of your skin and things like that, they would assume you were going to be a vampire. And so they would take action against you. And it was also, they would find people that were like eating flesh or drinking blood because they were either like crazy or there was like a cultural significance or something along those lines. And so they would assume that that's a vampire.
And this was in the 1700s?
Yeah, like even longer than that. It was like 1600s, 1700s kind of area. There was some other things like they kind of blended it into the culture. So like if you went against the word of the church or something like that, they assumed you were either a witch or a vampire or something along those lines.
That's wild.
What was interesting is, so this was mainly in the 1600s, and then in the early 1700s, it kind of started to phase out, and it wasn't so based in just complete hysteria. Now, it's not entirely true. There has been vampire hunters and vampire allegations all the way up until 2017. So like, few years ago.
People in the modern day still think vampires are real.
There was some people that were claiming that I don't want to get into it entirely because there's like a political aspect to it, but there were claims in 2017 that like a certain governor was working, not in the United States, was working with a family of known vampires. And so like he was attacked and so was that family and all that kind of stuff.
It's just so funny to me
Yeah.
when people think that these mythical creatures are actually real.
Right.
They're mythical because they're stories.
Right. And there's also like some interesting stories around serial killers in the vampire lore and how like all that kind of goes into it. But I'm not going to get into that. I want to talk about the books and literature, which I think is super interesting. So the first poems that involved vampires was in around 1748. That's when they started kind of talking about them fictionally, and people started to realize that like, yeah, these are just made up beings basically. And the first ever actual book written about vampires was called The Vampire by Dr. John Polidori. He wrote about Lord Ruthven, which was, he's kind of a popular vampire. He's been rewritten multiple times, but that laid the way for what we think of as modern vampires. He was like regal and smart, and I believe he was also immortal and all this kind of stuff. But his story is kind of crazy at how it came about. So the name Lord Ruthven was based on another woman's book called, and this was Lady Caroline Lamb, who wrote Glenarvan. And that was written in 1816, which was a parody of her ex-lover, Lord Byron.
Hey, I recognize that name.
Yes.
I don't know where I recognize it from, but I recognize his name.
He's written a bunch of books, and he wrote a story called Fragment of a Novel, which was never actually published, and it had a vampire by the name of Augustus Darvel, and that character, Augustus, was the inspiration for the vampire in the book. So the name was based on the author of it, which was based on his ex-lover's book. And then the actual character was based on the character that Byron had written.
I feel like that meme of the lady with the math equations in front of her face.
Right. I literally read this like 10 times to try to understand what it was saying. And the best part about all of this is Dr. John was Byron's personal physician. So like he was working in around Byron, all this kind of, all these things. And then he kind of like stole the story, so to speak, from him. But again, that laid the way for modern vampires. And then after that, in 1847, in these things called penny dreadfuls, which were basically newspapers that were like short stories. They were only a penny, and they were called dreadfuls because they were about like horror stories and gothic things. That's where Varney the Vampire comes from. He was written by James Malcolm Rymer and Thomas Peckett Prest. And he was also the first vampire to showcase fangs.
Huh. Interesting. It's interesting how every author has kind of made them different.
Yes, it's super interesting. And then we've got Joseph Sheridan Le Fanu, who wrote Camilla in 1872, which was our first female vampire. And that was also during that time, because the story involves Camilla, who is sometimes called Carmilla, so you might see that.
Yeah, that sounds vaguely familiar.
Yeah, and she was the first female vampire, but she was also a lesbian vampire.
Oh, how did that go over in 1872?
First of all, it was spread everywhere. Everybody read this book, basically.
I bet they were just super intrigued by a female lesbian vampire.
Right. And it was not like it was pretty polarizing. There was a lot of people who didn't like it.
Yeah, I'm
and a
not
lot of people
surprised.
Who did. So these all led up to Bram Stoker's story or book, Dracula, which is the one everybody knows.
Everyone knows Dracula. I mean, I've never read it. I never had to read it for anything. And classics don't always strike my fancy. So I don't know if I will ever read Dracula.
Yeah, I don't think I ever will either. But it was the one that everybody knows, the quintessential vampire novel, as Wikipedia put it. But the part that I thought was really cool about this was that Dracula was actually inspired by another book called The Land Beyond the Forest by Emily Gerard. And this was about mainly Transylvania, but it also talked about like different folklore and things of that area. So it did mention vampires. But it was also inspired by Vlad the Impaler, who's a real person.
Is he called Vlad the Impaler because he impaled people with his fangs?
It was with his swords and things like that.
Oh, well, if I were writing a vampire novel inspired by Vlad the Impaler, the impaling object would be my fangs.
And that's how Dracula came about.
Oh, really?
He also, so the cool part is that Vlad had like multiple names, and he was called Vlad Tepes and also Vlad Dracula because his father was named Dracul. And some people might know that in the video games and the show Castlevania, Dracula has the name of Dracula Tepes, which is both of Vlad's names combined. From here, Stoker released another one, which was Dracula's Guest, which apparently was supposed to be the original first chapter, but for whatever reason, he didn't add it on there. But then the next big one would be Marilyn Ross with Barnabas Collins series, who is a character that I don't know if she created him. From my understanding, is he came from the American TV show called Dark Shadows, which was in the 1960s. And then she took that character and wrote a bunch of novels in 1966 to 1971. And this was the first time that they were portrayed as like tragic heroes instead of being these horrible, evil villains. And then after that, the next big one was Anne Rice and the Vampire Chronicles. And those went from 1976 to 2003.
Oh my God, how many books are that from 1976 to 2003?
It's a lot. I think she has like 18 or something like that.
Wow.
And then according to Wikipedia, the last like big literature was Stephanie Myers's Twilight, which was 2005 to 2008.
Well, it looks like someone's going to have the next big vampire series or whatever.
Yeah, it seems like the way that I understood it was that in terms of like changing how people thought of vampires, all of these novels were very important to that. Because like everyone knows Twilight's vampires, right? Like that's huge in media. And it seems like no one's really done the next level of that quite yet.
You know, I've never read Twilight. I think I said that earlier. I can't remember. The memory's not so great all the time. Yeah, but I never read Twilight. Maybe I need to. Maybe I need to hop on that bandwagon finally over 10 years later.
Yeah, it's been quite some time, but I've been told that the stories are good, like the actual books. But again, never read them. I figured I would top this off with how to prevent vampires. And in the unfortunate circumstance that you are face to face with a vampire, what you can do to get rid of them.
Well, I really hope I never come face to face with a vampire.
Same. But one of the big things is preventing vampires, which is, again, what I mentioned, all these weird things people did with their dead. Probably don't need to do that nowadays, but if you're worried, you can bury people with sand and mustard seeds, apparently seems to be the big thing. And then also a gold coin, and you put it on their like forehead or their mouth or something like that. If you are worried about vampires and you want to keep them away, the classics like garlic, crucifixes, holy water, those all work. But also, supposedly, they cannot cross running water and they cannot go onto sacred grounds. So like churches, temples, things like that. They also, supposedly, cannot enter your house unless you invite them in. But the important thing to know is that as soon as you invite them in, they can come and go as they please for all of eternity. So even if you didn't invite them in originally, and maybe like a previous owner did, they can still come and go into your house. Kind of an interesting dilemma there.
Yeah, that's like, wow, you better ask previous homeowner if they ever let a vampire in.
It makes me think, I wonder if back in the day they did that. They're like, have you let vampires into your home before we can sell it? Again, if you have the unfortunate enough to come face to face with a vampire, the recommended method to get rid of them is to stake them with a wooden stake through either the heart or the brain. That is apparently an accepted procedure.
Okay, cool. Now I know how to get rid of a vampire.
Yes. And I should mention that the wooden stakes don't have to necessarily be wooden. That seemed to be up for debate. But for safety purpose, I would recommend wood. And you can use ash, oak, aspen, really anything. But those are all the ones that people used back in the day. And then they're also supposedly weak to fire. And then other people say they're made the embodiment of fire. So that seems to be up for debate as well. But burning them afterwards seems to be a pretty well accepted process.
All right. Well, vampires would never ever come into our house because we use a lot of garlic.
That's true. They would not like us.
They would hate it. It always smells like garlic in here of some form. That garlic
True.
bread dip, delicious. Would a vampire like it? Probably not.
Absolutely not. I also remember reading it was kind of weird that they never had necessarily a weakness to sunlight, but they just were more active at night. And so they avoided the sun. And I'm not really sure culturally when that kind of shifted to where they like burn up from the sun and stuff like that. Because I know it's a pretty popular trope in like TVs and movies.
Right. Yeah. Like vampire comes face to face with direct sunlight and they like immediately just turn into ash.
Right. Like that apparently was not a thing in really any of these books.
Yeah. I wonder how that came about then. Just some random person decided one day, I'm going to make my vampire die from the sun.
I wonder if it had to do with like maybe a vampire hunter book or something like that. Because it is really interesting, like you mentioned, like every one of these authors kind of took the vampire concept and then added their own little extra thing onto it every single time.
So vampires, pretty interesting creatures.
Very interesting. They have adapted and changed quite dramatically since they first, I guess, came about.
Yeah, like how did they go from being these like bloated, nasty looking things to pale elegance, wearing capes and having fangs and like how does that even happen?
I couldn't tell you. It seems like Dracula was kind of the culmination of all of that. But it seems like it kind of led up to that because like the other stories and things, there was like small little changes, but then Dracula was the full embodiment of all of it.
Very interesting.
Yeah, so vampires much deeper than, again, I originally expected.
Well, we do have a lot of vampire themed books to discuss, and I feel like all of these portray vampires in a different way. Now, I have not read a majority of these, so I cannot say exactly how the vampires are portrayed, but I feel like each summary kind of gives you a sense of how prevalent vampires are going to be in the books. So to start us off, I have one that's been pretty popular on Bookstagram this year. It's Bride by Allie Hazelwood, and this is a romance. We have Misery Lark. She is the only daughter of the most powerful vampire councilman of the Southwest, is an outcast again. Her days of living in anonymity among the humans are over. She has been called upon to uphold a historic peacekeeping alliance between the vampires and their mortal enemies, the Wares, meaning werewolves. And she sees little choice but to surrender herself in the exchange again. Wares are ruthless and unpredictable, and their alpha, Lo Morland, is no exception. He rules his pack with absolute authority, but not without justice. And, unlike the Vampire Council, not without feeling. It's clear from the way he tracks Misery's every movement that he doesn't trust her. If only he knew how right he was. Because Misery has her own reasons to agree to this marriage of convenience. Reasons that have nothing to do with politics or alliances, and everything to do with the only thing she's ever cared about. And she is willing to do whatever it takes to get back what's hers, even if it means a life alone in Were territory, alone with the wolf. So it's your classic vampire werewolf kind of thing. They obviously have a rivalry, which I feel like is very popular with vampire and werewolf books. And this is one that I've read. and I actually really liked it. It was a 5-star read for me. I thought it was such a fresh take on a rom-com, like just with the whole way the story played out and everything. And I was invested in it the whole time. I thought, the vampires were pretty classic vampires in this one. Like they had to drink blood as food. They didn't really eat anything else. Anything else they did eat was like nasty to them. They just wanted blood. So kind of your classic vampire type of thing. Also kind of classic werewolf thing in here. But it was just written so well, and it was really, really funny actually. So Allie Hazelwood knocked it out of the park with Bride, and it was actually different for her. She usually doesn't do vampire werewolf kind of things. She writes rom-coms featuring women in STEM. So this was very outside of the realm of what she does, but I thought it worked really, really well. And I did hear that there is going to be a second Bride book. So I'm very much looking forward to that, and I really wonder what she's going to do with it.
That is super interesting to hear that she kind of normally doesn't write in that realm.
Yeah, it was super cool to see all the world building too, because obviously vampires, werewolves, it is more fantasy based. And yeah, I mean, it was good. Like if you're looking for a romance featuring marriage of convenience, obviously, then I think this is a good one, especially if you want something that has that fantasy element too. It's good. I liked it.
First up on my list is the book that I actually have on my physical shelf, but I just have not read it yet, which is called Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter by Seth Grahame-Smith. And this is historical fantasy horror. Indiana, 1818. Moonlight falls through a dense woods and surrounds a one-room cabin where a 9-year-old Abraham Lincoln kneels at his suffering mother's bedside. She's been stricken with something the old-timers call milk sickness. "My baby boy," she whispers before dying. Only later, while the grieving Abe learns that his mother's fatal affliction was actually the work of a vampire. When the truth becomes known to young Lincoln, he writes in his journal, "Henceforth my life shall be one of rigorous study and devotion. I shall become a master of mind and body, and this mastery shall have one purpose." Gifted with his legendary height, strength, and skill with an axe, Abe sets out on a path of vengeance that will lead him all the way to the White House. So this story is kind of cool when I looked into it more, and it's written as a biography of Abraham Lincoln. And in the story, the main character is supposed to have found these hidden journals, and that's what he uses to write Abe's sort of new story, which is, I guess, based on this other story that I've heard or seen that's supposed to be a retelling of Abe's secret war diaries. So it's like, I guess, a fictional story. And so it's like a iteration of that, which I thought was, again, interesting.
So did they spin his diaries to make it seem like he was hunting vampires?
Yeah, kind of. Rather than like, here's all of the sort of secrets of the war and what he was feeling and thinking and all that kind of stuff, they said, Seth goes, well, what if there was a secret other one? And that's about him hunting vampires.
Interesting.
At least that was my understanding when I looked into the story a bit.
Well, that sounds pretty good. You better read it.
It's on my shelf right over there.
Yeah, I know. I see it. I stare at it all the time.
Maybe you should read it too.
I mean, possibly, maybe. We will see. I got a lot of things I need to read. Up next, I have one that's sort of a throwback for me. I read this one a very, very, very long time ago. I can't remember if I read it when I was like in 7th or 8th grade or in high school. It's called Marked by PC Cast and Kristen Cast. It is a young adult paranormal fantasy and romance. Very out of my wheelhouse when I was like 15. I don't really remember how I liked it. I just remember reading it. 1 minute, 16-year-old Zoe Redbird is a normal teenager dealing with everyday high school stress. Her cute boyfriend Heath, the school's star quarterback who suddenly seems more interested in partying than playing ball, her nosy frenemy Kayla, who's way too concerned with how things are going with Heath, her uber tough geometry test tomorrow. Gotta throw that uber tough in there. The next, she's marked as a fledgling vampire, forcing her to leave her ordinary life behind and join the House of Night, a boarding school where she will train to become an adult vampire. That is, if she makes it through the change, and not all of those who are marked do. Zoe is no average fledgling. She has been chosen as special by the vampire goddess Nyx. Zoe discovers she has amazing powers, but along with these powers come bloodlust and an unfortunate ability to imprint with Heath, who just doesn't know how to take no for an answer. To add to this stress, she is not the only fledgling at the House of Night with special powers. When she discovers that the leader of the Dark Daughters, the school's most elite group, is misusing her goddess-given gifts, Zoe must look deep within herself for the courage to embrace her destiny, with a little help from her new vampire friends. So, yeah, I really don't remember how I enjoyed this one, but this series is so long. There's like 11 or 12 books or something in this series, and for some reason, I only read the first one, so I don't know if that's an indicator of if I didn't like it or if I just never bothered to pick up the rest because the series itself is just so long. But I think I enjoyed it. I remember this one I had to keep like renewing at the library because it was a pretty slow start. But once I was into it, I was like, ooh, what's happening? Because I wasn't used to reading paranormal things, vampire things. Like it just
Right.
wasn't what I was used to. I was used to reading the Sarah Dessen cutesy, wholesome teenage romance books. That's what I was used to. I wasn't used to this dark stuff that was happening. But reading this again now, it does intrigue me. And I feel like I need to read it again. I feel like I've read this book multiple times because I kept having the intention of reading the rest of the series, but then it would always like enough time had passed by where I didn't remember what happened. So I would have to go and get the book again and read it again. I feel like I read it through at least twice.
Yeah, I'm not sure what that means for the book.
I don't know
That's
if
a
it's
hard
like
place to be.
a good thing for the book or a bad thing that I didn't finish it. I know these books kind of have like a cult following, so there are people who are very obsessed with these. I don't know if I could be one of those people, but maybe it's worth me trying to read again.
Maybe.
Maybe third time's a charm.
Could be. I do think we need to bring back the word Uber. That's I always was disappointed when that one left.
Yeah, I don't really know when this book was published. I'm not remembering that much, but I feel like it was sometime in the early 2000s.
Oh, so that would have been like prime Uber usage.
Yeah, and now people just use Uber to get from place to place.
Oh, so true. All right. I've got Van Helsing, the novel, by Kevin Ryan. And this is your classic fantasy horror.
I feel like most with vampires are going to be in the horror realm.
Yeah, pretty much all of them. Deep in the mountains of the 19th century Carpathia lies the mysterious and mythical land of Transylvania. A world where evil is ever present, where danger rises as the sun sets, and where monsters such as Count Dracula, the Wolfman, and Frankenstein's monster take form and inhabit man's deepest nightmares. Terrifying legends who will outlive generations, defying repeated attacks from the doomed brave souls that challenge them in their never-ending war upon the human race. On order of a secret society, only a lone force of good stands against them, the legendary monster hunter Van Helsing, a man revered by some and feared by many. In his ongoing battle to rid the earth of these fiendish beings, Van Helsing must now travel to Transylvania to bring down the lethally seductive, enigmatic, powerful Count Dracula, and join forces with the fearless Anna, a woman out to rid her family of a generations-old curse by defeating the vampire. But unknown to all, the immortal Dracula will stop at nothing to unleash his master plan of subverting human civilization and ruling over a world of havoc, fear, and darkness. So Van Helsing, I believe, was also in the original Dracula. Except in this story, he's now the center of the story. And the people have done a ton of different adaptations of Van Helsing, and especially the movie I really liked. But this classic vampire hunter role definitely was Van Helsing through and through. It's whenever I think of him, I just think of the classic he's got the crossbow and his weird hat. It's just such a great character idea and everything.
I am unfamiliar.
There's a movie called Van Helsing with, I believe it's Hugh Jackman, and that was like one of my favorite portrayals. It was really, really good. A lot of the times, too, Van Helsing is also synonymous with like werewolves in certain depictions. Like I think in that movie, he was also like half werewolf or something like that. In some different stories and books I've seen, or seen like descriptions for, I should say, he's also kind of half werewolf. But I know the true, real Van Helsing was just a guy with basically a crossbow and a sword going against these mythical monsters and stuff.
Interesting. Up next, I have one that I have not read yet, but I really want to because I've seen some pretty decent reviews for it. Obviously, not everybody loves this one, but from the good reviews I have seen, it might be something that I would enjoy. This is My Roommate is a Vampire by Jenna Levine, and it is a rom-com. Cassie Greenberg loves being an artist, but it's a tough way to make a living. On the brink of eviction, she's desperate when she finds a too-good-to-be-true apartment in a beautiful Chicago neighborhood. Cassie knows there has to be a catch. Only someone with a secret to hide would rent out a room for that price. Of course, her new roommate, Frederick J. Fitzwilliam, is far from normal. Oh, that's a mouthful of a name. He sleeps all day, is out at night on business, and talks like he walked out of a Regency romance novel. Oh, I know how those guys talk. I've read a lot of Bridgerton. He also leaves Cassie heart-melting notes around the apartment, cares about her art, and asks about her day. And he doesn't look half bad shirtless on the rare occasions they're both home and awake. But when Cassie finds bags of blood in the fridge that definitely weren't there earlier, Frederick has to come clean. Cassie's new roommate is a vampire, and he has a proposition for her. I don't know what that proposition is because that's where the synopsis ends, but I'm very curious as to what that proposition is. So I feel like I need to read this book. I've heard some pretty good things, as I mentioned, and it seems like something I would have a lot of fun with. It doesn't necessarily have to be mind-blowingly good, but if I have fun reading a book, it's like an automatic 5 stars for me.
I think that's the important part, is if you had fun, you enjoyed reading it, then, what's there more to want?
Yeah, and the author just released a second book to this called My Vampire Plus One. So that's been getting a bit of hype on Bookstagram too. So I feel like I got to read these. They could be good.
They seem fun. I always love that the descriptions have to throw something in about the guy shirtless or handsome or, something like that.
The publisher just has to make it really clear to the reader that this is a romance novel.
Right. I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm not hating on it. I just always think it's funny.
Also, I love his name, Frederick J. Fitzwilliam.
Yeah, that is like very regal. Fitzwilliam.
Because he's a vampire,
Next up for me is also in the romance kind of genre. It's called Guilty Pleasures by Laurel K. Hamilton. Anita Blake is small, dark, and dangerous. Her turf is the city of St. Louis. Her job, reanimating the dead and killing the undead who take things too far. But when the city's most powerful vampire asks her to solve a series of vicious slayings, Anita must confront her greatest fear, her undeniable attraction to master vampire Jean-Claude, one of the creatures she is sworn to destroy.
That is also a very vampire name, Jean-Claude.
Yeah, I thought so too. This one is pretty short description, but you get everything that you need to know basically right from it, which is what I liked. And this one is also, I believe, a series, if I remember correctly. And according to Storygraph, it was a very fast pace. So I can definitely see if you want more of it's like hints of romance. I think the main themes were like fantasy horror kind of deal. I think there was a touch of historical in there because I think this takes place in kind of modern times, like maybe the 80s or 70s or something like that. But it seemed pretty good.
During my vampire books research, I did find that there are a lot of vampire themed novels that are part of a series. Like it's super rare, at least from what I saw on Goodreads, for there to be like a standalone vampire book.
I also noticed that too. Like a ton of them were series, which
And
I
it,
thought was
yeah,
just why. Like nobody just writes Dracula these days anymore.
I know.
Come
It was
on.
just crazy to me because I would be finding these books and it's like, oh, number 10 in a series. And I'm like, oh, why are all these vampire series so long?
Yeah, I thought the same thing. And that was the other thing too, is not only are they series, but they're incredibly long series. Like
Yeah.
it's not like a 3 book or a 4 book. It's like 8, 11, 15. It's crazy.
I also noticed that most of them were published in the early to mid 2000s. So maybe it was just, something really popular back then, like 20 years ago. Maybe people just wanted all the vampires. And I mean, honestly, maybe Twilight started that trend,
Oh,
but
true. I guess I didn't think about that.
it was just like so many older vampire novels in a larger series. So it makes me wonder if Twilight kicked something off back in good old 2005.
I guess that would be why they have a special place in the Wikipedia page. They earned it.
I guess so. Well, my final vampire pick is The Serpent and the Wings of Night by Carissa Broadbent. And this is a romantasy. It's one that's been on my list for a while. I will read it eventually. The adopted human daughter of the Nightborn vampire king, Oriya, carved her place in a world designed to kill her. Her only chance to become something more than prey is entering the Kajari, a legendary tournament held by the goddess of death herself. But winning won't be easy amongst the most vicious warriors from all 3 vampire houses. To survive, Oriya is forced to make an alliance with a mysterious rival. Everything about Rain is dangerous. He is a ruthless vampire, an efficient killer, an enemy to her father's crown, and her greatest competition. Yet what terrifies Oriya most of all is that she finds herself oddly drawn to him. But there's no room for compassion in the Kajari. War brews, shattering everything that Oriya thought she knew about her home. And Rain may understand her more than anyone, but their blossoming attraction could be her downfall in a kingdom where nothing is more deadly than love. And people on Instagram have been telling me that I need to read this forever, so I may finally read it this month or next month. I don't know. Vampires can be Thanksgiving-ish, right? Fall vibes.
I'll give it to you. Yeah.
Okay. But it does sound very intriguing now that I actually read the synopsis. And last I checked, it was on Kindle Unlimited. I don't know if it's still there, but if it is, I'd be very happy because then it's less of a hunt to find this book.
Yeah, things being on Kindle Unlimited is pretty handy.
It is pretty handy. You just tell me what you want and I download it for you.
Yeah, pretty much. If the Amazon Corporation's listening, that's not true. We don't do that.
Well, Amazon shouldn't be mad anyway because they allow you to do that. We are part of a household.
Right. We are part of a household. I
I'm
forgot
not
about that.
pirating books. Are you kidding me? That's illegal.
Okay, the last one on my list is called Fever Dream by George R.R. Martin. When a struggling riverboat captain, Abner Marsh, receives an offer of partnership from a wealthy aristocrat, he suspects something's amiss. But when he meets the hauntingly pale, steely-eyed Joshua York, he is certain. For York doesn't care that the icy winter of 1857 has wiped out all but one of Marsh's dilapidated fleet. Nor does he care that he won't earn back his investment in a decade. York has his own reasons for wanting to traverse the powerful Mississippi, and they are none of Marsh's concern, no matter how bizarre, arbitrary, his actions may prove. Marsh meant to turn down York's offer. It was too full of secrets that spelled danger, but the promise of both gold and a grand new boat that could make history crushed his resolve, coupled with the terrible force of York's mesmerizing gaze. Not until the maiden voyage of his new side-wheeler Fever Dream would Marsh realize that he had joined a mission both more sinister and perhaps more noble than his most fantastic nightmare, and mankind's most impossible dream. Here in the spellbinding tale of a vampire's quest to unite his race with humanity, of a glorious riverman's dream of immortality, and the undying legends of the steamboat era in a majestic ancient river. This is interesting because I've never read a George R.R. Martin book, and this one seems like a nice little kind of leeway in.
Aren't his books really, really long?
Yes.
That's what I thought.
They're also like very, very descriptive. A lot of people almost to his detriment sometimes say they're too descriptive. Though this one actually is only 334 pages.
Oh,
So,
that's not bad.
no, that's definitely doable.
Well, that one sounds kind of interesting.
Out of all the ones that I was looking at, this one honestly seems like the most interesting to me. Though the Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter, I literally have that one. So I'll definitely read that at some point. But this one definitely kind of jumped up on my list. Seems pretty good. I love that setting that it takes place on, like the Mississippi with the steamboats. I think that's so cool.
Yeah, that is really cool. So hopefully it's good whenever you get to it.
We'll see.
Yeah, you got The Witcher to get through first.
Yeah.
Which I assume that is what you're reading this week.
That is what I am reading this week. I'm going to keep making my way through it. And like I said, I'm setting a soft goal of trying to finish it by the end of this week. So we'll see.
Well, we had a bunch of really great sounding vampire books.
Yes, we did.
They actually sounded a lot better than I thought they would, to be honest. Vampires kind of make me weary in books because I never know how I'm going to like the story. But I think these have convinced me that I need to read some more books with vampires in them.
I think so too. I usually don't really look at them with any intrigue or not. I just kind of passed by them. But now after talking about them more and learning about vampires more,
Yeah.
I'm like, man, I kind of want to read some of these.
Yeah, I'm just learning about the history of vampires. It's crazy.
Very interesting. I will shout out Castlevania on Netflix. It's an animated show and it's about the game Castlevania. Like it's a adaptation of it. And it has vampires, that's a big thing. And it also has the Belmont family, which are vampire hunters. And it's just an incredibly good show. And if you really do like vampires, I would highly recommend it. It is very gory though. So
Ooh.
if you don't like gore, I wouldn't recommend it.
Oh, well, I feel like vampires themselves are just kind of gory because they drink blood.
Right, yeah. So if you're okay with vampires, you're probably okay with gore, but I figured I would mention it anyway. It's extremely good.
Well, this week I am making my way through Gentlest of Wild Things, and it's a Greek mythology based novel. And it's pretty good so far. It's basically about this girl, Irene, who goes in her sister Phoebe's steed to go marry this horrible man. And she meets this man's daughter, and they end up working together on some stuff. And it's kind of interesting. I'm doing it no justice with this explanation, but if you search up Gentlest of Wild Things, it's a pretty interesting book. It has a beautiful cover too. It's like pink and white, and it's got the two Greek girls on the front and their togas and whatever it's called. It's pretty. It's giving off great ancient Greek vibes, and I'm enjoying it. So that's what I will be reading this week.
Is that the only one? Normally you have like 3 books that you got going on.
Well, I've been more of like a one book kind of girly lately because I'm trying to get through them at a quicker speed. When I have more than one going on at once, I feel like it takes me forever to finish a book. And I end up just prioritizing one anyway, even if I start another one.
That's true.
But I do need to start this one book called Spark of the Everflame for a buddy read that I joined on Instagram. It's been on my radar for a really long time. It's on Kindle Unlimited, so I may start that tonight when I'm laying in bed because it's on my Kindle and it's really easy to read your Kindle in bed. And I heard it's kind of a fast read, which may be what I need to get out of my slump.
I was going to say, yeah, that is exactly what you were asking for at the beginning. So maybe it's all the stars are aligning.
The stars are aligning. Well, the stars are aligning right now and telling me that I need to go pick something to read.
Absolutely.
So I hope everyone has a wonderful week. Maybe pick up one of these vampire books if you are feeling in the Halloween spirit. You want something a little spooky. And happy reading.